the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day, bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin's Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke.
This dictator thing is snowballing. There's a coup happening right now. It's like a war, but it's not overseas. It's from within. Our president has even got a name for us. We are the enemy from within. And the troops are primed and ready. Imagine, in the United States, it's actually getting scary to talk openly. People in all walks of life, professors, teachers, journalists, local leaders, they have to actually calculate, is it a good idea to talk about this here? Can I get away? Am I going to regret saying this here or there? When I give a talk and I come off of the stage, lately people say, thank you for saying that. It's courageous for you to be speaking out. If it's courageous for me to be speaking out, what does that mean? We all got to speak out. I cannot believe this is an issue in our country right now.
So that was reality TV star Rick Steves speaking at the October 18th No Kings rally in Edmonds, Washington. And for those of you who would disagree with my characterization of Rick as reality TV, I happen to find his shows very realistic, much more than, say, the Kardashians or Duck Dynasty or fucking whatever, I don't know, one of those kinds of shows. Rick is, by all reports, a real one, and somebody you definitely would rather have on this side of things.
Environmentalists, what's the new word for us? Climate extremists. It's evil, discredited. Antifa, what is that? It's not even an organization. It's created to con us. It's just another word for citizens who care about democracy. Antifa, anti-fascist. If that's what that is, let's hear it for Antifa. Anti-fascism. What's not to like about that?
He's a local around here. He's also the host of a long-running travel show, budget travel show on PBS. It's been running for decades. And honestly, he was pretty representative of a lot of the crowd at the event. There were lots of families with signs. There were lots of, boomers. There were lots of kids. It was a very Caucasian crowd. Granted, it's a pretty Caucasian city, but work with me here. There were a lot of people of pretty normie extraction here. And there were a lot of costumes, which is great. So close to Halloween, everybody had an excuse to go buy costumes, and everything's just kind of serendipitous right now about this. And I gotta say, it was more than a little surreal to hear a land acknowledgement as a drone hovers overhead.
This place is to host people and their successors, the Tulalip tribes, who since time immemorial have taken care of, hunted, fished, and gathered on these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. By acknowledging these homelands, we commit to working with tribal nations. As a community, we commit to learning the true history of this place and working toward a future rooted in respect, partnership, and justice. Thank you.
There was a lot of drone activity at this thing. I was there for probably about an hour at the beginning, and I saw at least 5 separate overflights. Someone asked who I thought it was, and I said Homeland Security probably. And I figure it's good for people in the crowd to understand that the surveillance state is now coming for them directly. And what better way to do that than to point out that somebody's got a drone filming them having the most benign protest you'll ever see. Hopefully, it's the local news or something, but there was definitely some Ellie out. And all the speakers made sure to emphasize a commitment to nonviolence. And they were very, very adamant about that point. And I think that has a lot to do with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's comments.
Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill have been speaking out against the No Kings rally leading up to today's events, including Majority House Speaker Mike Johnson.
I encourage you to watch. We call it the Hate America rally that'll happen Saturday. Let's see who shows up for that. I bet you see pro-Hamas supporters. I bet you see Antifa types. I bet you see the Marxists in full display, the people who don't want to stand and defend the foundational truths of this republic. And we do. And that's what we're here doing every single day.
This does not look like a crowd that's going to be violent. It just didn't really have that vibe about it for whatever reason. Anyway, the day crowds like this start getting violent is the day we know the game is pretty much over at that point. And I've been thinking a lot about that idea because a lot of people came out yesterday. Some estimates were saying the low end of that is 5.5 million. The high end is 8.5 million, which is wow. And I didn't see one report of arrests. There was one guy in Jackson Township, New Jersey, who apparently tried to drive a car into the local No Kings protest there.
We heard like this collective like, whoa, and then we kind of looked over and this white truck had came up on the curb and the curb turned into a guardrail and they hit the guardrail, and then I don't know if the guardrail hit into the person sitting behind it or if the truck hit her.
She says the truck immediately drove off.
Other people, we were kind of getting out of the way, and then the paramedics came and then the police came quickly.
Democrat leaders are going to join for a big party out on the National Mall. They're going to descend on our Capitol for their much anticipated so-called No Kings rally. We refer to it by its more accurate description, the Hate America rally. You're going to bring together the Marxists, the socialists, the Antifa advocates, the anarchists, and the pro-Hamas wing of the far-left Democrat Party. That is the modern Democratic Party.
Now, I'm no expert on anarchists, but I've hung out with quite a few in my time. Quite a few of my political opinions run in that direction. So I would say I at least kind of know what I'm looking at there. And this crowd was not an anarchist crowd. This was predominantly a normie crowd with signs that you'd see like in a resist Facebook group, or, that's almost what this was a resist Facebook group that just happened to have a meeting, because that's the kind of vibe that we had there. And I think that there's actually a lot of value in being able to have basically 7 to 8.5 million normies show up in the streets and not break things. Now, having that many people in the streets might be necessary at some point in the not too distant future. So building the signaling mechanism to make that happen now is a very smart thing, I think. And Carl's always saying this, but I also want to emphasize, I agree with him here, that these events provide a great opportunity for outrage, because right now there is enormous amounts of anger and frustration in this crowd. Look at the signs. There was a lot of discourse yesterday on Blue Sky about how these people are basically Fed posting in real life. And it's true. They're coming with signs and pictures of guillotines and all kinds of other stuff. You'd see somebody do that online. You'd be like, hey now, what's up, Fed? But these are like normies. These are people who don't necessarily spend a lot of time, and they're pretty boiling mad about the direction of the country right now and the world, and they're really looking for a place to put that anger. And someone's going to leverage that. And if you want it to go in a direction that you think would be more productive than what they're doing right now, or whatever the other folks might want to leverage it into, then you got to get out there and convince them. I mean, seriously, if you can't figure out how to do an entryism in a crowd like this, what are you even doing? So in addition to No Kings, there were also demonstrations at ICE facilities all over the country, including this one in Portland, Oregon, with some footage shot by journalist and former Did Nothing Wrong guest Amanda Moore. Go subscribe to her Patreon, flip her some money. She's great. So right now, we've essentially got two separate protest movements, the way I see this. We have the big rallies that are pretty peaceful. And if anybody wants to argue that point about it being peaceful, you should point out that we just had 7 million people come out in the streets with no problems. And when they had 53,000-ish show up in DC, Congress got sacked and people got killed. And I think I would lean into this if I was trying to argue this point, because I think on that side, the optics matter. And I think this is the thing we want to emphasize, not just that our protests are peaceful and theirs aren't, and that if not for Trump and his pardons, they'd all still be sitting in jail for what they did, as they richly deserve. And every time they mention people on this side being violent, I would just go to that footage. I would show the footage of their side attacking the police, throwing the barriers, all the slurs, all the yelling, invading Congress, the guy with the zip ties that was looking for Pelosi, the skull mask girl that stole Pelosi's computer. I mean, Baked Alaska with his feet up on Pelosi's desk on the phone doing his thing. I mean, come on now. Show plenty of that footage until they just get mad and call you names and walk away. Their side is not peaceful. We have seen that so many times now. They are not peaceful. When they come out into the streets, they're looking for either an excuse to play victim or heads to break. Every time. It's what their movement is based on, and it's what they do. So my suggestion would just be to bring up J6 every time these people want to argue about whether you're peaceful or not. Just absolute, pure, unadulterated whataboutism. And if they point out that they still haven't answered the question of why their side is so violent every time large groups of them get together from the people whose heads they are looking to crack. And don't they think it's even a little bit hypocritical of them to be expecting nonviolence? I mean, point to all the books they've written, like On Humans by Posobiec, where they literally talk about how they're going to have to be like Pinochet and Franco and kill the people that all get in their way, and explain to them that they have absolutely no leg to stand on when it comes to this. They've been preaching violence against us for years, and yet our side has done a very good job of going out and showing out in public with no violence, and their side just can't. Make them defend J6 if they want to have that conversation. And point out that the pardons don't really mean shit here, because all of those people were convicted in a court of law, and if not for the corruption that is every bit of the Trump administration, they'd all still be in jail. And I think that's a winning argument. Footage of No Kings versus footage of J6. Anybody that's on the fence here can look at this and say, one side is extremely violent and one side isn't. Yet the extremely violent side keeps accusing the non-violent side of being violent. Weird. And you hate to get into cliches like every accusation is a confession and all that, but damn, sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason. And then there's a smaller and far more militant movement. And that movement is mostly at this point focused on ICE and their detention centers. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And it's a really good example of what a diversity of tactics can mean in the real world. Because at some point, it's going to be necessary to merge these movements in order to be successful. And I think ideally, I would see the merge as looking like the large crowds showing up at the ICE facilities. I mean, think storming the Bastille here. Because a few hundred people going back and forth with DHS, that's one thing. But say you can turn the march from downtown Portland and point it at the detention facility? What happens then? You have, close to 50,000 people marching on the detention facility? Because I think at some point we have to ask ourselves what we want out of all of this. What's the absolute best case scenario for us? And I assume that looks a little different for everyone, but I think most of us can agree that somehow getting out of this current mess that we're in with as little damage as possible and a roadmap for making sure it never happens again is probably about the best situation we can hope for. So how do we get there? Now, this is the part of the show where I might get canceled because I'm going to talk about some strategic and tactical ideas that came from some really, really bad people. I'm a firm believer in the idea that you have to understand the opposition and why they do what they do, and that usually requires reading them in their own words. And I've heard a lot of people say recently that they think this thing needs a leader to get to the next level. They think this whole thing should unify behind one person and should set up a traditional campaign in 2028. And I respect that opinion, but I disagree completely with it. I think that people miss exactly how successful a strategy of, let's just call it, leaderless resistance has been for the really bad people. They have been able to keep going despite arrests and neutralization of their leadership because they don't report up to a boss in a leader or a leader in the same sense. Everybody knows the big picture goal, and everyone's working towards achieving that big picture goal using whatever means they think best. And that way, whenever somebody ends up inevitably getting arrested or otherwise neutralized, everyone else in the group can disavow and move on with nothing lost really but a cell. The leader is the person who plans the next action, when everybody's free to support that or not, depending on their circumstances and their individual read on the situation. And this also has the effect of cutting down on the gatekeeping that goes on for these kinds of things and getting some of the voices and ideas heard that a lot of the time have a harder time being heard in a more structured, top-down organization. I also think this shouldn't be anyone's personal army. We need to get away from that dynamic, the savior dynamic in politics, as fast as we can. And we should keep this on the biggest possible picture, in my opinion, because it allows us to keep the highest number of people on side and ready. This is not and should not be a stalking horse for the Gavin Newsom campaign or for the J.D. Pritzker campaign or for anybody's campaign, nor should it be. There is a guy named Ross on Blue Sky, the Abbot of Unreason. I've had him on the broadcast. It was a lot of fun. He's got a pretty great read on stuff most of the time, and he's yesterday looking at most of this as a show of force, and I think I agree with that. Even if the whole group doesn't necessarily agree on very much beyond the idea of limiting the harm that can be done from this current administration and making sure this can never happen again. I mean, at least we all agree on that, right? And if we were to make that the big picture aim/goal of No Kings, with an agreement, informal or not, that we just agree to disagree on everything else, anything else until a later date, I think that would actually serve us pretty well. No Kings as the emergency red line response, and we can gradually broaden the definition of emergency. And that happens until we have the capacity to put millions of people out into the streets on extremely short notice with a narrative of this only happens when the people's rights have been egregiously violated. But this is what happens when the people's rights have been egregiously violated. Put them on notice that we're all going to be out there in numbers way too big to suppress, and we'll be peaceful but unyielding. Make them account for these massive national protests that they are simply incapable of shutting down because they don't have the manpower to do it. And I think the best way to keep that capability is to avoid narrowing it down as much as possible. Keep this as a nuclear option with the implied notion that it could actually escalate if necessary. Because this is an incredibly powerful tool and they fear it. If they weren't afraid of it, you really wouldn't have seen speeches like the one Speaker Johnson made. You wouldn't see them trying to imply that all these people are terrorists and that they're the enemy from within. They're not capable of putting this many people into the streets for any reason. They can't do it. If they were, they'd have done it by now many times. We all saw what absolute maximum effort looks like from them, and it's J6. If they were capable of putting numbers like No Kings into the streets, just think of what they'd already have done with that. Until they prove otherwise, they cannot do this, and that is an advantage that we can absolutely leverage. And that's what we have to do from here on, in my opinion. We leverage the advantages we have, and we force them to engage on those terms. And then when we are successful, we are as loud about it as possible. And when you think about it, that's the strategy they've been running on us. And we have been taking that bait for the last 10 years. It's absolutely high time that we stopped and started using it back on them.